Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Project Cargo Risk Management Masterclass. Today, presenting for us is Dr. Nick Chapman. He is the head of Cargo and Logistics Marine Risk Engineering Lead at Aon Singapore. Nick has had an extensive career in risk management and insurance analyzations with posts in London and now joining us from Singapore, Dr. Nick Chapman. Good morning, Nick.
Morning, Don. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, and good evening from Singapore to those that may have met some of you last year at the annual conference in Malaysia. If to those that are new, nice to meet you. As Don said, my role with Aon is to lead the cargo and logistics portfolio for Asia, and now as well to really lead the marine risk engineering capability that we have. For those of you that don't know, Aon is risk advisory and insurance brokerage. I sit in the marine team. I specialize in cargo, but we also have all marine solutions within our team across the region. So before joining Aon, just to give you some background in terms of qualifying me to talk to you about this, I spent 7 years with major insurers, as Don said, primarily providing risk engineering and risk management advice to clients and to um, stakeholders in the chain. Before that, I spent 5 years doing major cargo loss investigation around the world. So, um, advising live incidents, trying to solve the problem on the ground, or arbitration and litigation uh, after the event. So, hopefully today I call on lots of different parts of my experience to share with you. Um, Basically, some insights from cargo claims in the project cargo space, some lessons learned, and how project cargo risk management is very important, how it could have addressed some of the issues before they developed. So, not all cargoes are equal. So in my world, as we said, I lead the cargo portfolio. That includes everything. Some things you as a membership will be very familiar with, but then also everyday items can be considered cargo as well. The chairs we're sitting on, the things on the desk in front of you, much smaller packages, much less heavily risk managed, although some very small, high value, theft attractive products, etc., will still take risk management quite seriously in terms of our client base, but it could be by vessel, by airplane, could be by pipeline, even rail, etc. So I think it's a very important distinction when we're talking about cargo that to distinguish between general cargo and between project cargo. So obviously today we're going to be talking more about project cargo. For the membership, I think it's a very familiar site, and many of you will be very familiar with project cargo in terms of forming a picture in your head. But just for the purposes of today, I think it's worth setting the scene with what we're going to be talking about. So, by definition, project cargoes are unusual, and they are not the routine cargo that I referred to just before. They're often bespoke engineered items for a particular engineering or construction project. They're usually, you know, out of the ordinary shape, size, with complicated lifting points, maybe abnormal centers of gravity. Nothing about them is routine, and they can be, on the one hand, cargo considered project cargo in my world, in the insurance industry, cargo under a project cargo policy may well be large, very, very large part fabricated pieces of infrastructure that require very specialist vessels, such as those many in the membership will be familiar with. But they could also be much smaller pieces of equipment or machinery that are still forming part of a project. And they may, to the layman, look smaller, more manageable, less complex, and they may be capable of fitting into smaller vessels than this one, for example. But I think the important thing is still to realize for many people unfamiliar with it is that those what may seem less large and complex and difficult to handle, those smaller items can still be unusual. They still require specialist lifting, stowage, and securing plans that are usually even subject to risk management to some degree, maybe not to the same requirement as the large specialist items that we saw a couple of slides ago. But these, when coming from the insurer side, these smaller items are still reviewed. When I was doing risk engineering for insurers, we still review the vessel selection, and we still review the lifting plans, the loading, stowage, securing, sea fastening, voyage plans for smaller items. They may not be critical items to the project, but they may still be quite important and may still have very high value associated with them. In some cases, depending on the nature of the specific cargo, even the smaller items may be subject to marine warranty survey as well, not just the larger construction items. So even for these, for a normal, particularly being carried on a more routine vessel type, they, each lift is unique regardless. So they still require careful review and preparation. And unfortunately, it does go wrong on occasion. And getting it wrong can lead to multi-million-dollar insurance claims and, or worse, injuries, fatalities. So I think project cargo as a sector is used to be more risk managed when I think about it in the context of my other cargo book, the rest of the book, more routine cargoes. Project cargo has an element and understanding of risk management about it, but as mentioned, things still can go wrong. So from this point on, we're going to focus a little bit more on trying to take lessons learned from when things go wrong and consider more around the importance of risk management and whether it could have prevented those losses. I would like to say that the cases we're going to cover, which are 5 in total, are based on public information. So I'm not sharing anything out of turn from clients. And we're, I had support in preparing it from one of the marine warranty survey companies that we use called Sterling Technical. So thank you to them. So the first case we're going to talk about is the Thorco Basilisk, which involves a nacelle being dropped. This was a general cargo vessel, which was offloading wind turbine nacelles in the USA. And crane number 1 was hoisting wire rope parted during the midlift, and a 69-ton nacelle dropped onto the tween deck, and the crane block punched through the top of the nacelle housing. For anyone that's involved in that industry, I'm sure many of the members are, that there is pretty sizable value attached to these units. And so this resulted in in approximately $3 to $5 million worth of damage to both the vessel and the cargo. Although thankfully no injuries. Um, so the undetected um, layer, there we go, sorry. The undetected internal corrosion in a 9-year-old wire rope was determined to be the root cause. And unfortunately, that corrosion was hidden beneath the grease layer on the wire. Um, After investigation, it was determined also that annual surveys and the planned maintenance schedule for the vessel did not mandate degreasing before inspection. So corrosion to approximately 60% severity was essentially invisible externally. Um, and during the post-casualty analysis, it was basically stated that the wire was near the end of its service life and probably should have been discarded. If we think about this from a risk management standpoint, we think about it in two ways: risk management around the actual cargo movement, or more integrated risk management around the vessel operation itself, and kind of systemic risk management, if you like. So generally speaking, we would say that wires and other things as well, but wires condition assessment must go beyond visual inspection, and particularly for wires, it's important best practice to degrease for inspection. Even magnetic flux test can be, the ideal, or discard them at defined intervals. And in the case of the latter, generally we would, when we're talking to clients, we would say, why should be replaced more frequently than every 10 years. The second case we want to look at this evening is the Z Marine. Sadly, on this case, there was a crew injury, which related to a sling failure. So this was a general cargo vessel loading cargo, during which time some of the crew were retrieving hatch cover lifting gear, and a fiber sling that was used to hoist the shackles parted under tension. There is mitigating circumstances in terms of one of the shackles became wedged in the storage housing, and the load fell, struck two crew members who again were standing in the hazardous zone of the suspended load. So there's multiple things at play in this particular incident. The sling safe working load is, nominally twice the load, but this sling was in poor condition and should have been discarded. It came out during the investigation that it had been found to be in less than ideal condition, but it had remained in service because there was no systemic risk management plan on the vessel side for inspection of lifting accessories. And also, one of the other findings was that the lifting gear was stowed in a location that was known to cause snagging. So not only did they have a sling which was not in ideal condition, they attributed that to a cause and then essentially chose to ignore it or not correct it, and continue to store the sling in the same location. So again, as I mentioned before, those are two systemic issues on the vessel side from a risk management standpoint, but also for the cargo, the movement of the cargo, the risk management basically did not include any formal lifting plan or risk assessment. So generally speaking, we would like clients to consider that every lift, however routine, I think in any walk of life, there's a tendency to consider we've done this many times, experience, we don't need to go above and beyond for this particular movement, etc. We think that's kind of, yes, experience is important, but each lift should have a risk assessment at least. Maybe not every lift requires a lifting plan, but best practice would say, yeah, okay, even a small risk assessment and a plan around what we're going to do and where we're going to do it should be implemented, and not only a lifting plan, but an inspection of all the accessories that are going to be used and the equipment that is going to be used for that lift. I think the unfortunate thing here is that we ended up with a crew injury, even though there was essentially a near miss report that was ignored or not acted upon. So I think near miss reports generally, whatever line of work you're in, whatever business you're operating in, are an early warning system, which, if acted upon, can prevent instances such as this one. The third case, again, building on the point that I just made, involves a crane shearing at the slew ring, despite a couple of early warning signs. So this was a general cargo vessel loading barges with a declared weight per barge. We all know that a declared cargo weight is only as good as the piece of paper it's written on. It should be verified. And four separate attempts were required due to issues with the barge listing and its trim. Crew suspected the barge was overweight, but again, an early warning sign was missed and they didn't act upon it. During discharge, the excessive load caused the slew bearing to fail, and the crane sheared off its pedestal at the slew ring. And eventually it was discovered that the barge itself was 20 tons overweight pretty much, and applying a 30% overload on the safe working load of the crane. So in this case, the root cause was attributed to, first and foremost, the cargo weight was declared or inaccurate. But in the first instance, before anything started, no weight verification was conducted. And again, no lift plan was prepared for the operation. Two key things, key risk management points there that were not undertaken. Again, we talk about early warning signs. 4 failed lift attempts should be sounding the alarm for the crew at this point. These were not acted upon, and they were not escalated at any time, primarily because there was no independent surveyor there to act upon and escalate, or even superintendent. And the tandem crane operation exceeded the vessel's maximum combined lifting radius capacity as well. So key lessons to be learned from this one: obviously, cargo weight must be independently verified. Before any weight, we can't assume, regardless of what it is, whether it's project cargo, whether it's in the other parts of my client base, whether we're talking about containerized cargo, there's regulation around verified gross mass of a container because of issues, systemic issues around stacks basically collapsing under the weight of containers which were under declared. That transfers across to project cargo more so than any other industry, I think, in terms of, we know going into the conversations that the cargo is usually unusual, outside of the norm, potentially with a center of gravity outside of the norm, and with unusual weight. So not to verify the weight, even though it was declared it was declared beforehand as a key point that was missed. And then that was before anything happened. And then to go on and ignore 4 repeated failed attempts. We talk about, for the larger items, for the critical items, when we appoint a marine warranty surveyor, we talk about uh, a stop work decision, and four failed, well, more than two failed attempts would trigger a stop work decision. So it's not even a something's not right here. It's a stop work, go away, uh, think about how we, what's going on, not trying to work around it. The fourth case is the Shangdi Wui Shan, which is a case where gantry cranes were being transported by a Chinese heavy lift vessel. Um, and basically, both cranes were lost during heavy weather off Spain in the Bay of Biscay. They broke loose from their lashings and fell into the sea. Most of the crane structures sank, and during the event, falling debris also caused significant structural damage to the ship's hull and deck. Root cause in this case, we don't have all the information publicly available, but essentially inadequate sea fastening design for the conditions that were encountered. So we can read from what happened that basically the wave forces that were exceeded the lashing capacity essentially. We know that there was no cargo securing review or independent approval of the sea fastening arrangements before departure, which is quite extraordinary, I would say. And deck cargo of this size, height, profile, etc., requires an unusual shape, and central gravity as well would require quite detailed analysis for motion and lashing. So unusual that didn't happen without knowing the details why. But for example, working for the insurance companies that I work for, this would be considered worthy of appointing a marine warranty surveyor, both at loading and in conjunction with the insurer's risk engineer or the broker risk engineer to review the pre-shipment pack in terms of calculations, not only for the sea fastenings, but also for the voyage plan and weather window criteria. So basically, the reason that review happens is to consider what would happen in the worst case scenario to ensure that there's a plan for sea fastenings which take into account the worst case sea conditions, weather conditions, not just average conditions, and also ideally build in a buffer and then set clear guidelines around conditions which are acceptable for transportation of that cargo. The final one I want to talk about is the Baoqian, which is an example of a trend that we've seen in recent years, and I'll talk a bit more about the trend after this case. There's an increasing trend, particularly in Asia, of bulk carriers being used to carry project cargoes. And remember what I said at the start of the session, of course, not the huge heavy lift items that require specialist vessels, but some of the smaller items, smaller machinery, and equipment that could still be cargo classified under a project cargo policy. So in this case, in particular, this is a 5-hold geared bulk carrier, which loaded a mixed stowage of, as you can see in the photographs, these are taken from the master's letter of protest, steel coils on the tank top, vehicles on top. On top of that was a layer of jumbo bags containing fertilizer, and further steel and vehicles were loaded on top. For any of you that are familiar with bulk carriers, they are designed specifically to transport bulk cargoes, really, not break bulk cargoes. Um, and for many reasons, a byproduct of that industry make it inappropriate for carrying cargo such as these because there are fewer lashing points available, fewer securing. It's not a tween deck that you can see the wing tank, hopper tank, the shape of it. The tank top may not even be reinforced sufficiently, etc. So there's lots of reasons why technically it's not a good idea to carry these cargoes in bulk carriers. But I'll explain why it's happening shortly. Before we get onto that, this vessel, when the vessel arrived at so we loaded in China, and the vessel was offloading it in Africa and in South America. And when the vessel arrived at the final discharge port, a considerable number of the coils had been damaged, not only physically damaged, but also they'd corroded, and they'd been basically affected by fertilizer, which had come from the jumbo bags that had burst during the voyage when subjected to all the other cargoes that were co-loaded into one hold. If you can imagine, obviously, quite a large cargo space. Cargoes probably lashed to each other rather than to the vessel, so not that stable. Moving around vehicles on top of jumbo bags, on top of steel coils, created conditions such that there was a lot of spillage of the chemicals within the jumbo bags, and obviously fertilizer in this case not meant to be mixed with steel coils, and particularly not in a cargo space environment. So the root cause in this case was inadequate stowage, as I've alluded to. Unfortunately, the inadequate stowage was also in direct contravention of the vessel's own cargo securing manual, and certainly against best practices, as I mentioned. In this case, I think the vessel's own cargo securing manual only permitted 2 tiers. In this case, we had 3 tiers of steel coils, with temporary timber structure, again, not ideal for keeping the bag's integrity when loaded above, and no doubt contributed to some of the tearing. And yeah, as I've already said, basically placing heavy plant and machinery equipment on top of the bags was also not a best practice guidance. And you could go one further to say that this was basically improper vessel selection. Very few lashing and securing options particularly for the heavy plant and machinery and equipment. So key lessons in this case. We talk a lot with clients about vessel selection. Carefully consider nominated vessels and also the proposed cargo stowage plans. Vessel selection is a key risk management component for all cargoes, but particularly for project cargo, for those items that I alluded to, where people may assume that they can load these smaller project items. If you think about a bulk carrier crew, they're not experienced in doing that, unlike some of the membership joining us today. They're used to loading grains, coal, or not things that require lashing inside such large cargo spaces. And yeah, exactly that. Bulk carriers are designed to carry bulk cargo, sorry. So they may not have the strength or the sea fastening capabilities for a successful shipment. So just diving a bit more into the reasons why this is happening. As I mentioned before, particularly in Asia, past few years, we've seen China is increasingly using dry bulk carriers to move project cargoes around the world. So 100% uptick year on year between 23 and 24 on tonnage, and 60% uptick year on year for the number of dry bulk carriers engaged for project cargo voyages from China. What's driving it is obviously this picture is a little bit out of date, not adjusted for recent trade changes, but essentially the same principles apply in that China is the largest purchaser of soybeans. Those flows come from South America and the USA, and they're transported in these large bulk carriers that we saw before. And, particular issue in Asia. So China, received 51% of all new built vessels in 2023. The vast majority of those were bulk carriers, not general cargo. And if you take China, Japan, Korea, Philippines, and Vietnam together, that was 97% nearly of all new builds delivered. So what does that mean? We have a high volume of bulk carriers in Asia, targeting a voyage to pick up a cargo in South America or the US. And they don't want to go under ballast. And the operators, as many members here, I'm sure will appreciate, they want to make money on the outward bound journey. So what does China? China manufactures a lot of things, produces a lot of things, and plenty of growing markets on the way in terms of India, Africa, and in this case, Brazil. So a lot of the plant and equipment and fertilizer is aimed at the very target countries producing the grains that these vessels are going to transport back in the opposite direction. So commercially, the pressures are there, the trade is there, and the kind of layer on top of that is that even for the same general cargo vessel, the project cargo charter rate is consistently higher than general cargo rate. So the price differential is also driving behaviors in terms of freight rate. Chartering a heavy lift vessel, for example, much more expensive than general cargo, and there's also a differential rate even within the same vessel. So it's kind of a perfect storm, and that continues over a 5-year period to drive behaviors in this way. So, we would argue that some of those cargoes should be carried more on a project cargo vessel or a break bulk vessel that's equipped with the right capabilities for transporting that cargo, not in here we say general cargo where that incorporates the bulk carriers. So not in those vessels. And unfortunately, the price differential is such that it's probably driving behaviors from those chartering the vessels as well. So taking our 5 examples of when things go wrong, I just want to spend the rest of the presentation really focusing on how risk management could have helped. So I think many of you will have picked up already, but across all of those incidents, in fact, really, there were some common failure modes that were emerging. And based on our experience and serving a global marine book, that they're not unexpected, but many of them can be very easily solved. So for all of them, pretty much apart from the last one, there was no formal lift plan or risk assessment before operations began. I think another common issue that we've encountered is that equipment condition wasn't verified before use. So that thinking of the crane wire separation, the slings, um, and then from the barge standpoint, uh, cargo weight basically not independently verified. And I think you will have picked up on a few of those examples. Multiple warning signs were ignored, so there was no stop work culture, and we get that, we understand that from a commercial standpoint, particularly in the marine sector. There's a lot of pressure on everything, on the crew and on time in port, time engaging with operations, etc. So uh, commercial pressures are definitely, they definitely come into play, but it doesn't mean to say that it can override safety. One of those instances has led to a crew injury, and I think we all have to look at that as a sector, really, in terms of balancing that. And I think a recurring theme for me is basically no independent review of sea fastening or securing arrangements. Um, so in all cases, I think an integrated marine risk management approach would have identified many of the issues. Easy to say with hindsight, but we'll just explain that a bit more on the next slide. And I think not only could have an integrated risk management from a systemic standpoint, as I mentioned before, on behalf of the vessel, or from a particular operational standpoint, just before the movement of that cargo, but also from proper implementation of selection of carriers and vessels that are more appropriate. And in some of those cases, I think having an experienced surveyor there would have helped. Now that is, depending on who the surveyor is acting for, can be seen as either a policeman or a nuisance, or someone that can help get things done, depending on where you sit in the value chain. And I think the important thing really is when we're in this context is that they are a very integral part of the risk management infrastructure. Most importantly, they would enforce a stop work culture, and they would escalate to their principals if they didn't think something was quite right. And in most cases, when that happens, the loss can be avoided before it develops. So, being a bit more specific, for the Thorco Basilisk, I think essentially an expert review of the planned maintenance schedule for sure would have flagged that there was no degreasing in the wire inspection cycle, and that should be addressed. And then in terms of the operation itself, a lifting survey before the operation started would have identified that crane wire in this case was 9 years old. We talk about 6 to 7 before you do detailed inspection outside of the norm. In this case, I think they had a 10-year turnover cycle. So I think knowing that, putting aside even what you think is an ideal shorter period, knowing that 10-year was the vessel's own plan for turnover of that wire should have triggered a more detailed look at that under a pre-operation lifting survey. In the case of the Z Marine, a mandated register of all the lifting gear, I think for sure would have removed the condemned sling from the inventory. And a lift plan for that particular lift would have included an inspection of all the items and equipment to be used, and you would like to think would have identified a sling which had already been condemned because of its condition. Again, in that particular case, they were aware of it, so perhaps we can't speak in terms of what would happen, but what we would like to see in an ideal scenario. On the CEC Pacific, the approval for the lift, for sure, if a marine warranty surveyor was appointed, the approval by them for the lift would have been conditional on an independent weight verification. Um, and I mentioned before, 2 to 3 failed lifts would have triggered a mandatory stop work. So it should have sent alarm bells to those involved, and it didn't, unfortunately, or they chose to carry on regardless. And again, I think it's another case where if a surveyor had been present, then there would have been a much quicker escalation, and that escalation would have been documented. Um, in the Shangdi Wu Shan, the voyage plan and securing plan at least should have gone under desktop review by a marine warranty surveyor or a marine risk engineer. Uh, that would have that review would have included a detailed breakout of the the required vessel specific motion analysis for the Bay of Biscay, particularly knowing that it is the Bay of Biscay, which is an area of concern anyway, and it was a winter route. So I think that review would have been more strict than it would be for alternative bodies of water or alternative times of year. And hence issuing the approval to proceed would have been a more rigorous process, and that certificate for approval for the transportation would have been dependent on basically revising the lashing calculations for a worst case sea state. And also the voyage plan would have included a weather window. Again, I don't know what the criteria were in that specific case, but that may have been more strict than normal given the time of year and the body of water in an ideal world. And the Baoqian, I think this comes back to balancing risk management with commercial realities. It's a conversation we have perennially with clients. I think in this case, it's more valid because there is an industry trade, commercial trade happening. It's a reality. And so balancing technically what we think is correct and what should be done in an ideal world from a risk management standpoint against the commercial realities of what is happening, and it is the trade, is quite a difficult process. But that doesn't mean to say that those engaged in project cargo can't still build a systemic risk management strategy around vessel selection. And also absolutely should be the case, even if vessel selection is a challenge because of the commercial realities, then the proposed mixed cargo stowage in that particular case should have flagged early warning signs again in terms of potential risks to the cargoes themselves, plus the vessel. And in that case, quite sizable cargo claims were presented to the owners at destination. So I also want to just share kind of a more general, I won't go through the full detail here, but just a more general risk management approach for those items that aren't critical items, for the smaller machinery equipment, those that might end up in a bulk carrier or be carried by other general cargoes. They are still part of a project. They're still a project cargo. And as I said before, they still require risk management to a degree. And this is, just a broader risk management conversation for those items. So we talk about basically ensuring that the machinery and equipment is properly prepared prior to shipment. So we have plenty of smaller handling damage claims caused by failure to mobilize all the moving parts or protect uncoated metal parts, etc., from abrasive conditions during the voyage, and particularly for second-hand machinery, removing hazardous components within the machinery itself, such as batteries, oils, etc. From a packaging and handling, obviously, some majority of that kind of machinery and equipment, if it's crated, it's a bespoke crating, usually by specialist vendors, but it might not be. And I've definitely had personally 5 or 6 claims where crating wasn't sufficient, which caused an issue, or labeling, signage, etc., was missing, and other items were co-stowed, which caused a larger claim on multiple cargoes. Um, and then, yeah, clear handling instructions. I think the key thing for anyone involved in the value chain, contracting, otherwise subcontracting, I think within your membership, you're going to have specialized crews, specialized carriers. You may, under project cargo, that may not always be the case on my side from a project cargo insurance standpoint. There may be people in that chain that aren't experienced, that don't understand the complexities of these cargoes, and not familiar with how to approach lifting, loading, securing them outside of normal cargoes, traditional cargoes. And the case with the bulk carrier is a prime example where the crew aren't specialized for project cargo shipments, and of course they do the best they can with what they have and based on what they know. But it's not, I think expertise and experience, as I'll come on to at the end of this presentation, is very important from a risk management standpoint. And yeah, that comes into carrier selection as well. Monitoring in transit, I've included that one. That can be important depending on the cargo. It's not always, it can tell you some information in the event of a claim, but it's not really a preventative measure. But we do have some sensitive equipment moved around the world, larger equipment, whether it's whole production lines or trains or laboratory equipment, manufacturing equipment, where they can be quite sensitive, and being able to demonstrate that it exceeded safe limits for whatever parameter you're measuring, whether that's tilt or shock, moisture, dust. All these things can be important in terms of how a claim develops afterwards. But I think the key thing, or the most important thing, is that relationships matter. So working with trusted partners, approaching any voyage, any lift, any shipment in the same manner from the outset, with risk management at the core, and leaning on them to be able to deliver your own instructions if you're subcontracting, is very important. So particularly when it comes to lifting, handling unusual cargoes. So concluding remarks, I think for the most part, many insurance brokers, clients focus purely on this last box, and maybe some of your membership insurance is important. You may also focus quite heavily on transfer. The key message that we have is essentially that's the end. That should be the end of the conversation. It shouldn't be the beginning of the conversation. A mature risk management strategy starts with identifying what are the risks to me, how do I measure them, what do I measure, where do I measure it, how do I measure it, and then use that to make an assessment of the risk. What is the impact of this particular risk, what's the cost of doing nothing, and how do we evaluate that against what I think my appetite is. And then, risk management, lots of different ways, lots of different nomenclature to break out risk management. But I've used here, 4Ts, basically either you terminate, avoid that risk altogether. It's too important to my operation. I don't want to entertain that risk. So I just avoid it, find a different way of doing things. I can treat this risk. So yeah, okay. Some risk you're willing to tolerate and wear yourself as part of doing business, and that helps set your overall risk appetite. Other risks we will treat, so maybe we'll try and mitigate and manage the risk as best we can because we're confident in our people, we're confident in our process, and then the risk that remains is the risk that should be transferred, and that's what comes out either contractually or through insurance. And why is that important? I think our value chain as as an industry, project cargo industry, our value chain is only as strong as our weakest link. It's I think there's a general acknowledgement in the industry that project cargo needs risk management, but really effective risk management requires integration at each step for all of the stakeholders. And beyond that systemic integration of risk management, as I mentioned before on the prior slide, it also needs supervision, it needs enforcement, and it needs escalation when things aren't being followed. So there's a technical component, I think, to project cargo risk management. As we've touched on throughout this session, review of the cargo, the route, the equipment, the carrier, the vessel, the vendors. There's a technical component to that, and then as I mentioned at the end of that conversation, is a risk transfer component. So reviewing the contract terms, identifying gaps, exposures to the business, and either contracting your way out of it, or if that's not possible, selecting the right insurance to cover that exposure of your balance sheet. And I think successful project cargo risk management needs leadership and coordination. I think we all know, all of our colleagues, all of your members, very practical, solutions orientated people. Moving some of these items are extremely complex operations, and understanding that is key to being able to identify and implement a effective risk management strategy. And yeah, from my side, of course, having experience and specialized brokers can help with that coordination, can help support you through the process and learn from others in the industry to differentiate yourself in the marketplace as a supplier of choice. So time is nearly up, and with that, I'll end and thank you to the organisers for the invitation to present, and also, as I mentioned before, thank you to Sterling Technical, one of the marine warranty surveyors that we would use, and also CSL Global, another one that we would use for contributing some content to this presentation.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much. If I may, any questions, any of the members want to ask something? We do have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, if I may, Julia. Yeah, Nick, thanks a lot for your speech. I have a customer that is selling seal pipes coming from China to Argentina. When they look for vessels, of course, they look for the cheapest, and they require top stow. And looking into the case that you showed to us, top stow is not enough because you have to check how the cargo is stowed below and what are the separations. What would you recommend us to ask for the to the ship owner regarding the cargo stowed below our cargo, below our steel pipes in this case?
Mm. Yeah, I think thank you for the question. One, it's a difficult one, as I said, because on the one hand, the argument back to the vessel is usually, this is the trade, this is the way we do business, it's a practice of the trade. I've had a lot of cases where we've tried to intervene with loading of vessels in China, which can be very challenging. What we came at in the end from insurance standpoint, but also to support negotiations as well going on in the background, commercial negotiations, was to have someone in attendance to document what you can, to point out what's wrong independently, ideally, but then use that to support, in this case, the photographs came from the vessel to support a letter of protest, for example. It's very hard to argue with loading out of China that they're doing it wrong. technically, potentially, they might be, but the best advice we can give is having a surveyor there to escalate and to document is very important. And I think coming back on a couple of the points that I made earlier about trying to get as much information before the shipment as possible around vessel selection and pre-stowage plans. But yeah, unfortunately it's very, very challenging.
It is. And there is. Do you see the insurance company looking into that details before quoting the services, asking for a certain type of vessel or certain type of stowage, or the rate is exactly the same independently of if you use a general cargo, a bulk carrier, or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, we could. It's my job as the broker to try and argue with the insurer for the best rate, right? I think if I go back to my previous roles on the insurer side, what would normally happen in that scenario is that would come into the insurer, and the insurer would take a look at it and maybe restrict cover a little bit depending on the situation. So, let's say in the beginning you have a all risk cover for cargo, something about the vessel that was selected or the method of loading basically would cause the underwriter to become more conservative and to restrict cover in some way, whether sublimit or come back from ICCA or risk to B or C cover, and that's not a situation we want our clients to be in. So that's why really we try and work proactively with them beforehand and talk about risk management should be built into the whole process. So of course, price is king. Commerciality has to be a key part. That's why all businesses exist. But how do you mitigate that risk as much as possible? So selection of vessel is one, partners, long-term partners, contracting to protect yourself from certain things that may be beyond your control, but may be happening on that trade lane. Yeah, we can always try and find standalone solutions if something is a real problem. But the idea is that we work with the client up front to get things as to make it as easy as possible for insurers to say yes.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Nick, thank you for 5 extraordinary actualities or scenarios and the risks associated with those. It's incredible. From I will always have a marine surveyor on both sides of the ocean. When I'm loading cargo, it's my intake number one, as well as all the other aspects, lifting equipment reviews. Uh, it's just incredible what's happening. At the same time, fighting against human nature
Yeah.
and market trends and economics, all things that we must look out for as project freight forwarders and purveyors of international transportation. Uh, you know, Thank you very much for your presentation. Very insightful, and wish you
Thank you.
well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just before everyone leaves, if we could please open up our cameras for a group photo for our social media. Okay, whenever you're ready.
All right.
Okay. Okay, I
Okay.
think we're ready. Everybody smile.
Hey.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nick.
Bye.